Instead of enjoying a well-deserved weekend, she found herself in the middle of a dense jungle, dying of thirst. The young woman was desperately searching for water, but her plans were interrupted by a sudden scream. She spun around at the sound, expecting to see something horrifying. But the cause of the panic was far more mundane. Her boss wasn't scared of a venomous snake, but of a simple spider web. This helpless pretty boy was Kang Ha-jun, the CEO of Yeonhee Company. And ironically, he was her boss. She silently picked up a stick to show him how easily this problem could be solved. She gave him a reproachful look, wondering how anyone could be afraid of a spider web, as if it could electrocute them. Ha-jun awkwardly looked away. In normal life, a CEO and a junior secretary would never cross paths like this, far from the urban jungle. But reality was much harsher. They were somewhere in the vicinity of Banten, Indonesia, with no one knowing their exact location. Suddenly, her eyes sparkled with joy. She spotted edible cherry guavas on a tree. This was their chance. So how did they end up in this situation? To understand, we need to go back a bit, to the bustling offices of Yeonhee Company. Once just a subsidiary, it had grown into a giant thanks to breakthrough technologies. A success story that was hard to believe. Working in the secretary's office was like a battlefield. An enormous workload fell on every employee's shoulders. And Yeonhee, being a low-ranking secretary, was no exception. Her day was filled with minor troubles, like the constantly broken printer. But all the office hustle froze the moment he appeared at the doorway. Mr. Kang. Kang Ha-jun was an IT genius who had brought the company to the global stage in a short time. He was the leader of this office army. He walked down the hall, discussing the details of his Indonesia trip with his assistant, where the marketing team had already arrived. Ha-jun gave an order to clean the conference room in 30 minutes, as another meeting was scheduled right after the current one. Her senior colleague immediately passed the task onto Yeonhee, who could only meekly agree. Many thought a secretary was the closest person to the CEO, but in reality, that wasn't the case at all. Yeonhee waited by the conference room, assuming the meeting would end soon. Suddenly, the door flew open and Ha-jun slammed a stack of documents on the table. A dead silence fell over the room. He contemptuously asked the team if this was the report they had spent a whole week on. Yeonhee sighed. She had never made eye contact with him, but she knew his personality well. He believed they had wasted a week on something he could have done in 2 hours. The senior secretary cautiously reminded him it was time to leave for the airport. Ha-jun irritably stated that they had delayed him with their useless presentation and abruptly ended the meeting. For his unyielding stamina and complete lack of sympathy, the employees had nicknamed him the Cyborg. Or the alien. Yeonhee stood aside, holding a folder. Behind Ha-jun's back, her colleagues sighed in relief. They were glad the meeting ended early because of his business trip. For Yeonhee, it meant one thing: a long-awaited chance to leave work on time. Yeonhee Company manufactured key parts for mobile phones and had recently developed a revolutionary battery that didn't need recharging. It was to present this technology at an event in Indonesia that Ha-jun was personally going on a business trip. And for Yeonhee, it was a great opportunity to finally not stay late at the office. She was already packing her bag, anticipating leaving at 6 on the dot when the phone rang. She picked up the phone, surprised, not expecting a call at this time. The person on the other end introduced himself as Kang Ha-jun. The name sounded vaguely familiar, and then it hit her. Mr. Kang? She jumped up from her seat in shock. He ordered her not to let on that he was the one calling. Still in shock, Yeonhee whispered a quiet, "Yes, sir." Ha-jun told her to calm down and listen. She was just about to leave work. Yeonhee mumbled that she was finishing up, but her boss immediately shushed her. He reminded her again that no one should guess who she was talking to. To throw off her colleagues, she loudly said a random phrase about food. After making sure no one was listening, she told Ha-jun it was clear. He stressed that the matter was very important. He asked if she had her passport with her and ordered her to immediately book a flight to Jakarta in her name. To Jakarta? Right now? She couldn't believe her ears, but he confirmed the earliest flight possible. Yeonhee was in complete shock from such a sudden order. Her entire weekend was ruined. Ha-jun promised to generously compensate her for working at such short notice. She quickly checked the flights. The earliest was at 10 p.m. with a layover in Bangkok, taking a total of 16 hours. Yeonhee noted hopefully that it was still better than the next flight, which was 33 hours long. She tried to suggest a direct flight at 8 in the morning, which only took 7 hours, but Hajun cut her off and ordered her to take the night flight. Inwardly, she was seething with anger at this evil boss who had stolen her weekend. Gathering her courage, she asked what she should do next. At that moment, her senior colleague, Ms. Jung, called out to her. She announced that she and some colleagues were going for sashimi and invited Yeonhee to join them. Yeonhee politely declined, citing made-up plans. The colleague noted snidely that Yeonhee was always busy but didn't seem to have a boyfriend. Ms. Jung, with a fake smile, expressed hope that Yeonhee would join them next time, though both knew it was just empty words. As she was leaving, the colleague tossed another task over her shoulder. Come in early on Monday and buy a few kinds of tea that had run out. They had joined the company at the same time, but Ms. Jung always acted like her superior. Yeonhee promised to get it done before anyone else arrived, so no one would guess who did someone else's work. Left alone, she sighed. She loved sashimi too. But that was okay. She was also having dinner out tonight. That dinner was an in-flight meal, which she enjoyed despite the circumstances. She used to be afraid of flying, but frequent business trips with Mr. Kang had helped her get used to it, though sleeping on a plane was still difficult. And this whole urgent trip was for one very important mission. She had to deliver his favorite green tumbler. Yeonhee recalled interviews with celebrities who carried their favorite items with them. An actress with her childhood pillow, and a famous idol with a teddy bear, his good luck charm. And now, CEO Kang Ha-jun had ordered her to secretly and immediately bring him his green tumbler. She even looked it up online, blanket syndrome, a condition where an adult maintains a strong attachment to a childhood object. The unbelievably handsome IT genius Kang Ha-jun was suffering from an unhealthy attachment to a tumbler. Why else would he make her fly to Jakarta? But why did she have to suffer because of it? Exhausted from the long journey, she finally arrived at Jakarta's international airport. She couldn't believe the absurdity of the situation. Rich people like Mr. Kang sent people halfway across the world for a mug, while she had to overcome her aerophobia just to deliver it. She recalled his instructions. A man named Hone would meet her at the airport, and she was to follow his directions. Suddenly, a strong hand grabbed her wrist. A large, bearded man stood before her, pronouncing her name with a thick accent. She realized he was trying to say, Mo Yeonhee. Could this suspicious-looking guy be the Hwan she was told about? The man smiled broadly and confirmed he was Hone. Yeonhee was shocked. They drove in an old jeep through some deserted area, kicking up clouds of dust. Panic seized her. Where were they? And who was this suspicious man? Hone assured her with a smile that they were almost there. But Yeonhee knew the new product presentation was supposed to be at a luxury hotel, not in this wasteland. Suddenly, a helicopter appeared above them, descending with a roar. Hwan stopped the car. Yeonhee watched in horror. He got out of the car, approached the pilot, took an envelope of money, and left, leaving her alone. Her worst fears were coming true. She was being sold. She cursed the day she agreed to this whole mess because of a guy with his stupid tumbler. A tall man emerged from the helicopter. The dust slowly settled, and she recognized him. It was Kang Ha-jun himself. He walked up and thanked her for making the long journey. At that moment, she remembered how it all began 2 years ago when she first started at Hain Company. Back then, a senior colleague had forced her to carry a huge stack of documents alone. She had stumbled, and all the papers scattered across the hallway. Yeonhee was on the floor, picking up the sheets, when a department head passing by scolded her. He yelled that she shouldn't be making a mess in the hallway, apologizing to Mr. Kang, who was walking behind him. Ha-jun walked past without even a glance in her direction. To her, he was a person from a different world, whose life never intersected with hers, even when they were in the same space. And now, that same person was standing right in front of her, in the middle of a desert. She tried to hide her excitement, saying she was just doing her job, but he was insistent. He told her to think about a reward she wanted, promising to grant any reasonable request before she returned to Korea. A promotion, money, a vacation, whatever it was, she was pleased that her hard work was finally being acknowledged. She smiled and told him she brought the tumbler as he asked and had been very careful with it. Ha-jun smiled warmly and praised her for a great job. Looking at his happy face, she thought about how much he must have missed his mug. She even felt a little sorry for him. She was about to take the tumbler out of her bag, but he stopped her, saying they were leaving soon.
Leaving? To where?
A wave of terror washed over her. He hadn't mentioned they would be taking a helicopter. She froze in place, trembling with fear. She had aerophobia and couldn't get on a helicopter. Yeonhee asked who would fly it since Hwan had left. Hajun calmly replied that he would, as he had gotten his pilot's license in his early 20s. Outwardly, she feigned admiration for his talents, but inside, she was clenched with fear. She reminded him that her return flight to Korea was in 3 hours, but he just brushed it off, promising to pay for a business class ticket so she could get back to work on Monday. So she'd have to work right after landing? This crazy boss! But the thought of her first ever business class flight softened the blow a little. He added that she shouldn't thank him too much because he was even more grateful to her. He promised again to compensate her for all the trouble, and she could only thank him politely in return. But the fear didn't go away. Did she really have to get into that helicopter? Her feet felt rooted to the ground. She couldn't understand why, of all the employees in the company, this fate had befallen her. Haijun noticed her hesitation. He said it seemed he had overlooked something important and walked towards her. Unexpectedly, he swept her up into his arms like a princess. Yeonhee cried out in surprise. She couldn't believe what was happening. Hajun explained with a slight smirk that it would have been difficult for her to get in by herself in her clothes, so he just decided to help. He gently placed her in the seat. She was inside, but the horror only intensified. He fastened the seatbelts and advised her to be careful with her heels, but her heels were the least of her worries. A chill ran down her spine. She wanted only one thing: to get off this damn helicopter. But it was too late. The helicopter soared into the sky. The large windows made everything seem much scarier than on a plane. Nausea rose in her throat. Hajun, oblivious to her condition, asked with a smile, "Isn't it cool?" She mumbled something affirmative, squeezing her eyes shut. He asked in surprise how she could see anything with her eyes closed. Yeonhee confessed that she would throw up if she opened them. It finally dawned on him. He frowned and asked if she had aerophobia. She covered her mouth with her hand, trying to suppress a wave of nausea. He was bewildered. Why didn't she tell him? She tried to argue that no one would hire a secretary with aerophobia, but she was overcome with nausea again. At that moment, Hajun showed unexpected care and handed her a bottle of water. He advised her to look up, or not to look down, or even better, to look at him. Then she would feel better. She raised her eyes to him and froze. He was so handsome. So much so that for a moment, she even forgot her fear. Haju noticed her staring and cleared his throat, embarrassed. He said that she kept looking, so he suggested it. Yeonhee blushed to the roots of her hair. She thanked him for the cold water, saying she felt better. He decided to give her some advice. You have to overcome fear by facing it head-on. Easier said than done, she thought indignantly. She said he was too perfect to understand her, but her condition was similar to how he couldn't live without his tumbler. Yeonhee quickly assured him that she would never tell anyone about his love for the mug, even if she got fired. But Hajun calmly replied that no one would fire the company's savior. Savior? She assumed he meant himself, since he was the heart and soul of the company. That meant his attachment to the tumbler was really serious. She tried to encourage him, saying that everyone has their problems these days. She has aerophobia, an acquaintance of hers has insomnia, so he had nothing to be ashamed of. At that moment, the helicopter lurched violently. Haejun swore and gripped the controls. Yeonhee thought he was angry at her for her unsolicited advice and started to apologize. He yelled at her to stay still. He wasn't talking to her, but to the helicopter. Hajun was trying to figure out what was wrong with the controls and who had done this. The aircraft was shaking more and more violently, losing control. Alarms blared in the cockpit. Yeonhee screamed in panic that they were going to crash. Haejun, not taking his eyes off the instruments, grimly confirmed, "I think so." Everything clicked into place in his mind. He realized the target wasn't the new technology prototype, but him. He yelled that they needed to get out of the helicopter. Get out? In midair? She asked in horror if that meant they were going to die. Luckily, there was water below, which gave them a chance. He ordered her to look at him and calm down, but she fought him off hysterically, screaming that it was all his fault. He firmly promised they wouldn't die and told her to trust him and unbuckle her seatbelt. She refused, but he didn't listen and unbuckled it himself. He opened the door, and a deafening roar of wind burst into the cabin. He ordered her to drop her bag and hold on to him. It was the only way to survive. But she couldn't. In a panic, she screamed that the tumbler was in the bag. Through tears, she stammered that she wanted him to be happy because he'd be lonely in heaven without his mug. Haejun looked at her with disbelief. In the next second, he snatched the bag from her and hurled it overboard. She screamed in horror, unable to believe he had thrown away his beloved tumbler. He pressed her head to his chest, blocking her view. And in the next moment, they fell together. There was a deafening splash. Yeonhee's consciousness blurred. She saw her own funeral photograph. Was she really dead? She saw her younger brother Yeonhee in a wheelchair and wondered how he would manage without her. A thought about her insurance flashed through her mind. She had died while running an errand for her boss. But then she heard her colleagues whispering that she had gone to Indonesia on vacation. She grabbed her head in panic. No one knew the truth. It was all that stupid CEO's fault. Suddenly, she felt a sharp pain in her chest, and the vision began to fade. She woke up on a shore. Haejun was leaning over her, performing chest compressions. He was desperately pleading with her to breathe. He checked for her pulse. Then, pinching her nose, he leaned in to give her mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. He continued to fight for her life, desperately calling her name. She slowly opened her eyes, seeing the blurry face of a handsome stranger above her. His lips touched hers. Her first thought was that she was in heaven. And heaven turned out to be quite damp. The voice above her anxiously asked if she was okay. It was Kang Haejun. She looked at him, still not fully understanding what was happening. She asked if he was in heaven too. He told her to get a grip. They weren't dead. Then where were they? Her head was pounding. The memories of the helicopter crash and the jump into the water rushed back in a whirlwind. She sat up, holding her head. Haejun touched her shoulder with concern. She looked at him. He had saved her. But wait, if this isn't heaven... She asked if he had performed CPR on her. He nodded, saying that she wasn't breathing. Her eyes widened in horror. Her first kiss! She burst into tears, mourning its loss, while a baffled Haejun tried to figure out what was wrong. She asked why he pushed her so hard. She thought he was going to break her ribs. He admitted he couldn't feel her ribs at all, only her chest. He cut himself off mid-sentence. He cleared his throat awkwardly and said it didn't matter. Yeonhee looked herself over. She had lost her heels and her hair tie. She sadly noted that she had lost the rubber band she used to tie her hair. Haejun promised to buy her 100 rubber bands once they got back to Jakarta and to compensate her for everything else. Compensate. That word again. Compensation wasn't the problem right now. She wanted to tell him everything she was thinking, that he almost got her killed over a stupid tumbler, and that money doesn't solve everything. But she held back. This was harsh reality, and she couldn't afford to lash out at her boss. She brushed herself off and firmly said she needed to go home. He grabbed her hand, asking where she was going. They needed to get to the airport so she could make it to work on Monday. He told her not to worry about work. She noted that he at least looked guilty, but insisted. No one knew where she was, and her absence would raise suspicion. Haejun grabbed his head. That wasn't the main problem right now. She guessed he didn't know the way and suggested calling a taxi, reminding him that her phone was in the bag he threw away. So they'd have to use his phone. An awkward silence fell, broken only by the cries of seagulls. She looked at him in horror, begging him to say she was wrong. But he just covered his face with his hand in guilt. He admitted the bitter truth. They were in a jungle, and they were lost. She didn't give up and suggested they call for rescue, but he revealed he'd left his phone at the hotel because he was afraid of being tracked. Tracked? He explained that someone had been following him, and the helicopter crash was no accident. It dawned on her. Someone had intentionally damaged the helicopter to kill him. He confirmed her suspicion. Her mind raced with wild theories about his dark dealings, bribes, love affairs, criminal connections. As if reading her mind, he cut her off, assuring her he had never done any of the things she was imagining. He didn't know who was after him or why, but he was determined to find out once they got back to Jakarta. Back to Jakarta. That goal seemed unattainable right now. She laughed, saying they couldn't walk for days in their current state, and referenced her favorite survival show. And then it hit her. She asked if Ms. Han, his senior secretary, would come looking for him. Ha-jun dejectedly replied that he had told her he was just going for a walk. She exploded. Where was he going? Why did he hide it from his assistant? He snapped back that he didn't end up going anywhere, so it didn't matter. She grabbed her head. She couldn't believe his irresponsibility. He coldly remarked that he wasn't going to apologize because her anger wouldn't change anything. He was right, but that didn't make it any easier. She felt anger boiling up inside her. He should have apologized. In despair, she sat on the sand and buried her face in her hands. Ha-jun silently sat down next to her. He looked completely lost. She realized she wasn't the only one having a hard time. She had always thought he was invincible, but now she saw his vulnerability. It was time to pull herself together. She jumped to her feet, declaring decisively that they couldn't just sit around and wait. First things first, they needed to find water. He looked at her in surprise. She enthusiastically quoted the host of her favorite show. "If there's no water, you have to eat fruit." She pointed to the cherry guava tree she had seen earlier. They walked closer. Ha-jun looked at the tree, but his gaze lingered on her. He clarified if she was talking about the red fruits on the tall tree. She enthusiastically described how delicious and juicy they must be. However, the man replied that they didn't look very sweet. Thinking about the juicy berries, Yeonhee kept staring at his lips, remembering how they had touched hers and thought they were very soft and very warm. Her words were ambiguous, and the air between them grew thick with tension. She had completely forgotten about the disaster. There was only one thought in her head. They had kissed. It was her first kiss. Ha-jun, snapping out of his thoughts, turned to her and asked if she had ever tried cherry guavas. Their eyes met, and a spark flew between them. She was out of her mind. What was she thinking in a situation like this? Yeonhee shook her head and said she had never tried them. She got nervous. Did he notice her ridiculous thoughts? He said it might sound strange, but with her hair down, she looked like a different person. He asked her directly, "Ms. Mo, have you always been this pretty?" Her heart started pounding furiously. He thinks she's pretty? For Mr. Kang, who had seen so much beauty in his life, to say something like that was incredible. She frantically tried to think of a witty reply. He thought he had made her uncomfortable and started to apologize. She rushed to assure him it was okay. She blurted out that she liked the compliment and asked him to say it more often to give her the energy to survive. What was she even saying? To her surprise, he agreed, adding that it was true anyway. The conversation was getting more and more awkward. She needed to change the subject quickly. She remembered their goal, the cherry guavas. She pulled him towards the tree, eager to do something, anything. Suddenly, Ha-jun wobbled. Yeonhee turned pale and started to fall. He caught her. She was dizzy from dehydration. He told her to sit down. She sat on the sand and asked him to pick the fruit for her. She looked at him hopefully, confident that he could do it. After all, he had such strong muscles. He agreed to try. She cheered him on, clenching her fists. Ha-jun walked up to the tree and started shaking it. But after a few attempts, he turned around and said he couldn't do it. He suggested they give up and find another tree. Yeonhee was shocked. Give up? The infamous Kang Ha-jun, who never uttered that word, was giving up after a few shakes? What a waste of muscles! She mumbled under her breath that the host of her favorite show would have definitely managed. She described him with admiration, as a true leader who would take any risk for his people. Ha-jun's eye twitched with jealousy. He asked if this host was taller and more handsome than him. She replied that it was a matter of taste, but personally, she thought he was very cool, and he was her ideal type. His pride stung. Ha-jun attacked the tree again with renewed fury. Yeonhee stopped him, realizing it was useless. She said she had another plan, and resolutely grabbed the hem of her skirt. He looked at her, puzzled. With a tearing sound, she ripped her skirt up the side to allow for more movement. Ha-jun blushed and looked away. She sighed in relief. Now it was much easier to move. Still red, he asked how she could just tear her skirt like that. She shrugged. She had no choice. His sudden shyness was making her feel embarrassed too. She announced that she was ready and told him to let her ride on his shoulders. He was shocked. He had never carried anyone on his shoulders before. It wasn't about her weight. She suddenly remembered he was her boss. Asking your boss to give you a shoulder ride was, to say the least, strange. He covered his face with his hand, saying it wasn't about the discomfort. He was just afraid that she might get hurt because of him. His concern touched her deeply. She resorted to her last argument. If they didn't pick the fruit, she would die of dehydration. He gave in and crouched down for her to climb on. They swayed from side to side, trying to keep their balance. Finally, she settled on his shoulders, grabbing his head for stability. Her heart started beating faster again. The position was very intimate. She remembered how embarrassed he was when she tore her skirt. But now he seemed fine with this. She ran her fingers through his soft hair. He asked why she was holding his head, if she was afraid of falling. At that moment, his fingers, holding her leg, squeezed a little tighter, and she shuddered at the unexpected touch. She wanted to say something, but the words got stuck in her throat. Barely controlling her emotions, she asked him to take 2 steps to the right. They were right next to the branch with the fruit. She picked a berry and took a bite. The taste was divine, like fireworks. He reminded her that she could get sick if she didn't wash the fruit. She waved it off, saying they were organic, and continued to eat them with pleasure. Ha-jun was horrified. Was she eating bugs along with the fruit? She asked him to let her down. Once down, she showed him a handful of juicy berries. He looked at her in amazement. He asked how many she ate up there. He pointed to her lips, saying they were covered in juice. She embarrassedly started wiping them. He said, "Not there. Over here." He reached out and wiped the corner of her mouth himself. She tried to pull away, but he held her steady, telling her to be still. His thumb gently brushed against her lips. They stood very close, looking into each other's eyes, and the world around them seemed to stand still. Their faces were just inches apart. The tension was thick in the air. Ha-jun was the first to break the silence, noting detachedly that the product demonstration must have already started back at the company. Yeonhee flinched, pulled back to their harsh reality. She thought with annoyance that she could be sleeping soundly in her bed right now, instead of suffering in the jungle. Ha-jun added grimly that his secretary, Ms. Han, was probably running around frantically looking for him. They both started talking over each other, complaining about their problems. Her brother doesn't even know she's missing, his presentation is going to fail, and a mountain of dirty dishes and laundry is waiting for her at home. Finally, Ha-jun cut off the pointless argument and suggested they head back to the shore. But Yeonhee wasn't ready to let it go. Suddenly, he stopped short and called out to her. With a worried tone, Ha-jun announced that the footprints they had been following had disappeared. They looked around. Nothing but impenetrable jungle surrounded them. They were lost. Yeonhee sank into thought, trying to figure out what to do next. Wandering through the forest without food would be pure madness. Noticing her shoulders tremble, Ha-jun gently touched her, asking with concern if she was crying. She turned around and he immediately pulled his hand back, realizing his mistake. He noted with surprise that she wasn't crying, even in such a hopeless situation. Yeonhee stated firmly that she doesn't cry, because, as she believed, tears don't solve anything. She was about to walk on, but Ha-jun stopped her again. And only then did he realize with horror that she had been walking barefoot through the jungle this whole time. He asked why she hadn't told him, as it must have been painful. Yeonhee simply replied that it wouldn't have changed anything. After all, there are no shoe stores in the jungle. Without a word, Ha-jun knelt down on one knee and began taking off his own shoes, offering them to her. Yeonhee was shocked. What about him? But he just waved it off, saying he had his socks. He grabbed her ankle firmly, not giving her a chance to object. Yeonhee lost her balance, and he immediately told her to lean on his shoulder. She mumbled shyly that he didn't have to do this. But Ha-jun, without looking at her, replied that he's the kind of person who likes certainty in everything. Those words struck a chord with Yeonhee. She said she had a question for a man who loves certainty so much. She asked if he remembered the day she first came to greet him. The memory took her back 2 years. She had knocked timidly on his office door. The head secretary introduced her as the new employee, and Yeonhee's heart was pounding with nervousness. Ha-jun sat at his desk, buried in documents, and didn't even bother to look up at her. He coldly ordered her to introduce herself. Yeonhee bowed and stated her name. After promising to do her best, all she got in return was a dry, "good," before he immediately turned his attention to the head secretary, scolding her for missing documents. In that moment, Yeonhee felt completely invisible. Back in the present, as he was putting his shoe on her foot, she asked him directly why he had treated her that way. She reminded him that he had acted as if she didn't even exist in the room. Yet he had politely had tea with the other new employee, Ms. Jung, when she came to greet him. Ha-jun frowned, trying to remember who she was talking about. He explained that Ms. Jung's father was his college mentor, which was why he'd spent time with her. It was nothing special. Yeonhee then asked resentfully why he hadn't asked Ms. Jung to deliver his precious tumbler. Ha-jun looked up at her and simply replied that he thought she would do a better job. And that answer was enough. Despite the girl's embarrassment, Kang Ha-jun asked her to give him her other leg. She couldn't believe that the incident that had upset her for 2 whole years suddenly didn't seem to matter anymore. Was it all because Kang Ha-jun, the distant and unapproachable CEO, was now sitting at her feet, brushing off the dirt and putting his own shoes on her? He was focused on tying the laces, explaining that they had to be tight so she wouldn't fall. When she stood up, he asked her to walk around and see if they were comfortable. Yeonhee replied that she felt like a child waddling in such huge shoes. For the first time, Ha-jun let out a genuine laugh, telling her she was exaggerating. His laugh caught Yeonhee by surprise. She stared at him, feeling her cheeks flush. Suddenly, an idea struck her. She announced that she would climb a tree to see where the sea was. Ha-jun tried to stop her in a panic, but Yeonhee was determined. She assured him she was a rock climber, and this was no problem for her. She only noted with regret that she'd have to take his shoes off. Ha-jun cried out in horror that the shoes were not the problem. But it was too late. Yeonhee was already scrambling up the trunk, telling him not to worry. Ha-jun sighed. She hadn't changed at all. His thoughts drifted back again, but this time, 7 years ago, to a youth support event. He was sitting next to his father, Chairman Kang, when a scholarship student was invited to the stage to read her poem. The host announced, "Autumn," by Yeonhee. The name sounded familiar to Ha-jun. A young Yeonhee enthusiastically read from the stage about how much delicious food there is in autumn. Apples, pears, persimmons, rice, and even pizza. Ha-jun sat in the audience with a stone face, wondering why they chose such a ridiculous poem. Yeonhee finished by hoping to eat even more at the event. She concluded her performance by making a heart shape with her hands and shouting, "3 cheers for Chairman Kang." Ha-jun's father laughed heartily. He called her an interesting girl, and Ha-jun had to agree. But to himself, he thought that this girl was already learning how to suck up to people at such a young age. 2 years ago, when he first saw her resume at his company, he immediately remembered that incident. He was displeased that his father's company had sent him this employee. He complained about having to deal with the personnel his father was casting off, but his subordinate reminded him of the employee exchange agreement. Ha-jun was furious. His father had given him independence, yet continued to meddle in his company's affairs with stupid agreements. He made a decision then and there. His company would no longer accept or send any employees to his father's company. Looking at the photo on her resume, he swore that if she tried to write him weird poems to flatter him, he would fire her. Later, arriving at a company dinner, he noticed that not all the employees were present. He was told that only one person was missing, Ms. Mo. Ha-jun frowned, as he had ordered everyone to attend. He was reminded that Ms. Mo was the same scholarship student who had recently been transferred from his father's company. He cut them off, stating that the agreement was terminated, and she was now his employee, so there should be no special treatment. His subordinates nervously explained that her reason for being absent was different. It turned out her brother had injured his hand, and the head secretary had let her go home. Ha-jun coldly remarked that an injury required a hospital, not a call to one's sister. Then the secretary told him the truth, with a heavy sigh. Yeonhee's parents had died in an accident when she was young, and her brother was disabled. With an injured hand, he couldn't operate his electric wheelchair. Hearing this, Ha-jun froze. So that's why she wrote that poem. It wasn't flattery. It was a cry for help, her desperate way of surviving in a cruel world. He realized she should have been praised, not laughed at. She deserved admiration for smiling through her hardships and making others laugh. And he, without knowing her story, had been hasty and judgmental. He turned to his subordinate, Mr. Park. Hajun asked if the atmosphere in the office was always this heavy when he wasn't around. Park assured him their department was the most fun in the company. Hajun then announced they would have another company dinner next week, a faint smile on his face. Everyone was thrilled with the boss's generosity. But Miss Mo didn't attend that dinner, or any of the ones that followed. She silently carried out her duties, trying to be as unnoticeable as possible. She was there, but it was as if she wasn't, like a person deliberately avoiding the spotlight. And now, in the jungle, Hajun smiled as he watched her, thinking he had lost hope of ever seeing that cheerful girl from 7 years ago again. Yeonhee, already up the tree, yelled down, asking if he was even listening. Hajun coughed awkwardly, thinking to himself that she was still so confident and didn't care about others' opinions. Suddenly, a joyful shout came from the top of the tree. She could see the sea. But then Hajun screamed in terror as he saw her hand slipping. He begged her not to let go of the tree and to come down immediately. She agreed, but as she started to descend, her bare foot slipped on the smooth trunk. Hajun lunged forward in a panic, his arms outstretched to catch her. Luckily, she managed to grab a branch and was left dangling, narrowly avoiding a fall. He yelled at her to be careful, saying she had scared him to death. And in that moment, he froze. She was the one who almost fell. So why was he the one who was so scared? When she got down, she noticed he looked unwell. She asked if she had really scared him that much. Hajun just said he was a little startled. But Yeonhee didn't buy it. Judging by his pale face, he was much more than a little startled. She reached for his face to check if he had a fever. Her touch made his heart skip a beat, then start pounding at a frantic pace. He stared at her, a strange tremor running through his body. He couldn't understand why his heart was racing like that. He grabbed her hand and pressed it to his own forehead, asking if he felt warm. His own touch on her hand sent another wave of heat through him, and his heart beat even faster. He abruptly pulled away, grabbed her hand, and said they needed to hurry to the shore because it was getting cold. Yeonhee was confused about the cold weather and noted that he definitely didn't have a fever. Hajun walked ahead, trying to figure out what was wrong with him. No fever, yet he felt unbearably hot. Maybe it was stress? Thorny bushes appeared ahead. Yeonhee took charge, saying she had shoes and would go first, and he should follow her. Hajun obediently agreed. He watched her back, and the sunlight filtering through the leaves created a glowing halo around her. A flustered but warm expression appeared on his face. Finally, breaking through the thicket, Yeonhee joyfully announced they had arrived. A sandy shore stretched out before them. They had reached the coast. She asked if he wasn't happy, but Hajun, with his usual coolness, wondered if he was supposed to be proud of this accomplishment. Yeonhee sighed and asked if he knew that everyone at the company called him an alien. He asked in surprise. She explained that people saw him as a cyborg, incapable of emotions, and often told him to go back to his home planet. Hajun looked out at the ocean and replied that it wasn't that he didn't know how to empathize, he just didn't want to, because he hated feeling someone else's pain. Yeonhee was puzzled. So he was deliberately suppressing his empathy? But why? She thought that here, on the island, he seemed completely different. Anyway, she decided to push those thoughts aside and focus on the more immediate problem: how they were going to sleep. Hajun walked barefoot on the sand, pondering her words. He didn't care what people said about him. He had always believed that to succeed, you had to focus only on yourself. Other people were just strangers who had nothing to do with him. But then why, when Yeonhee almost fell from the tree, couldn't he remain indifferent? He picked up a seashell from the sand, examining it thoughtfully. His reaction completely contradicted his life's principles. Yeonhee watched him from a distance. Even on a deserted island, he looked like he had just stepped out of a commercial. She mentally scolded herself, ordering her heart not to be swayed by a handsome guy picking up inedible seashells. She needed to think about survival, finding food, building a shelter, and figuring out how to get back to Jakarta. The mere thought of all these challenges was horrifying. On top of that, she had to drag along this rich guy who had never known hardship. Her head was already spinning. Steeling herself, she walked up to him and gave her first command. "Start a fire." He asked how, and she told him to gather some branches. Hajun irritably clarified that he was asking how to start a fire without matches. Yeonhee calmly replied, "With friction." He argued that while theoretically possible, it was nearly impossible in practice. Yeonhee gave him a reproachful look. Was he really going to give up without even trying? After a while, Hajun, drenched in sweat, was vigorously rubbing the stick. His hands were burning, and sweat was running down his face, while Yeonhee sat nearby, yawning in boredom. After 2 hours, he jumped up in despair, shouting that it wasn't working and never would. He gave up, suggesting they try to start a fire with his watch glass tomorrow and just go to sleep for now. But Yeonhee was relentless. If he couldn't start a fire, then he should go find food. She explained they needed to eat to build up strength for the long journey to Jakarta. Haejun admitted with horror that he had never caught a fish in his life. Yeonhee sighed. She had figured as much. She suggested they fill up on guava for now and gather other fruits on the way. But she couldn't resist a jab, noting that he couldn't even climb a tree. He got indignant, asking if she was laughing at his incompetence. Yeonhee immediately started praising him, saying how smart and strong he was and that there was nothing he couldn't achieve. But, after a pause, she added that all of that only worked in the city. Out here, in the wild, he couldn't do much of anything. Haejun, through gritted teeth, was forced to admit she was right. Yeonhee continued that this was about survival. They needed to eat and sleep warmly to survive and get back. And since he lacked the necessary skills, he had to acknowledge her as the leader here. Haejun was stunned by her audacity. She was going to be his superior? Yeonhee firmly confirmed it. He argued that they didn't need a leader since there were only 2 of them. She countered that a leader was necessary precisely because there were 2 of them, and they had no time for arguments. Haejun was silent, dumbfounded by her logic. She added that he had no idea how amazing her survival skills were. Painful memories flooded her mind. Her parents' death, and her aunt taking her and her brother in. But soon her aunt had squandered all the insurance money, and their life became a living hell. One day, Yeonhee overheard her aunt calling an orphanage to get rid of them. She tried to find help, but it was useless. When her aunt found out Yeonhee knew, she flew into a rage and threw them out onto the street. Hugging her crying brother, a young Yeonhee swore they would make it on their own. A fierce determination burned in her eyes. They would survive. Back in the present, she listed her skills to Haejun. She could fish with a spear, gather shellfish, and find edible fruits. Besides, she was a rock climber, and he himself had seen her climb that tree. And finally, she declared that she knew how to start a fire. Haejun froze. He jumped to his feet and asked indignantly why she had made him do it then. Yeonhee smiled and said she was inspired by his own year-end speech. She quoted his words about how recognizing one's weaknesses is a driving force for self-improvement. She told him to forget about their status, gender, and age difference. For now, she asked him to trust her and follow her as the leader. Haejun clutched his head. So she wanted to order him around because she was more capable? Yeonhee pretended to hesitate, musing that a secretary can't order her boss around. And then she delivered the final blow, declaring that in that case, she was resigning, effective immediately. Haejun yelled in a panic that she couldn't do that. She immediately caught him on his words. If he still considered her his secretary, could he do what she asked of him? Haejun was trapped. Straightening up, she announced that from this moment on, she was the leader, and he had to obey her without question. Haejun still couldn't believe it, but she left him no choice. With a radiant smile, she gave her first order. Go find firewood. Haejun crouched with 2 sticks in his hands, unable to process what was happening. Him, a CEO, having to obey her? But he had to admit that in this situation, she really was more competent than him. He began his task with enthusiasm, finding suitable dry branches and even a whole log. When he was done, he wiped the sweat from his brow, pleased with his work. But then he snapped back to reality. What was he doing? He kicked the log in frustration. He grabbed his head, thinking about how everything at the company was probably falling apart without him. Where did it all go wrong? What was his mistake? His thoughts took him back to the past. The trip to Indonesia was just a pretext. The real purpose was to sign a contract for a bauxite mine. Right in the middle of a meeting, his head secretary had approached him. She delivered terrible news. The mining company had refused to supply them with bauxite. The chairman, Kang, was furious. This jeopardized the release of their key component. Kang Haejun's brother, Sungjun, intervened, promising to look into it. But their father yelled at Sungjun, accusing him of inaction and reminding him that Hajin's company's problems would affect their core business as well. Hajin realized his father was using him again to spur his brother into competition. He was tired of this endless fight for control of the family business. He declared he would solve this problem himself. His father flew into a rage, reminding Hajun that his company had only grown thanks to the support of the main group. Skipping repeats the previous frame, close-up. The chairman ordered his eldest son, Sungjun, to thoroughly investigate who had interfered with the bauxite import. Sungjun patted Hajun on the shoulder with a fake smile, promising to help. But Hajun didn't trust him. Stepping aside, Haejun made a few calls. He was sure that Sungjun was doing nothing, and worse, that he was the one behind the supply disruption. He decided to act on his own. He asked his secretary if it was true that the Australian mine had demanded a 50% price increase. Upon confirmation, he ordered her to accept their terms and prepare the contract. But then, an agitated subordinate burst into the office with bad news. The Australian mine had suddenly backed out of the deal without giving a reason. Haejun knew it wasn't a coincidence. His brother, who had just left for a business trip to Australia, was determined to stop him at any cost. But Hajun had no proof. He decided to find another mine, even an undeveloped one, and not let his brother win. At that moment, his secretary entered and informed him that his business trip to Indonesia was ready. He thanked her, taking the documents. He had information about a mine in Sumatra, and the APEC conference was the perfect cover. He was about to leave, but remembered a crucial detail: the bauxite purity tester. He couldn't take it with him. With enemies all around, the device could be stolen. He decided to leave it at the company and have someone bring it later. He needed an inconspicuous container, and his eyes fell on the green tumbler. He also needed a person who no one would pay attention to. Yeonhee was the perfect candidate. Snapping back to the island, Haejun replayed the events in his mind. Everything was going according to plan until Yeonhee showed up with the tumbler. Did someone notice he had chartered a helicopter? They tried to kill him in a foreign country to make it easier to hide the evidence and pass it off as an accident. But who? Could his brother Sungjun really hate him that much? He decided not to jump to conclusions. First, he had to get out of here. And then he would find the culprit. He shook his head and suddenly saw a huge pile of firewood in front of him. When had he gathered so much? For a second, he felt a surge of pride, anticipating praise from Ms. Mo. But the next moment, he was horrified with himself. Him, a CEO, excited about getting praised by a low-ranking secretary? What was wrong with him? He remembered her words, spoken with such confidence. He had never ceded leadership to anyone, and now he had to obey her? The thought brought a wry smile to his face. In the office, she was a shadow, but here, in the jungle, she shone, driven by a determination to survive. He felt gratitude towards her, and guilt, and he found her incredibly beautiful. He touched his shoulder, still feeling her weight. Everything felt so strange. This storm of emotions, the racing heartbeat, the heat in his body, and this new feeling, the desire not to let her down. All of it was unfamiliar to him. Meanwhile, Yeonhee was wandering the shore, looking for anything useful. She wasn't going to give up, and was carefully inspecting everything around her. And suddenly, her eyes landed on the wreckage of their helicopter, washed up on the shore. Getting closer, she saw that it was completely burned and smashed. If they had stayed inside, they would have surely died. She decided to look for anything useful inside. To her delight, she found an axe, a life jacket, and even a working flashlight. And also, a bottle of water. She remembered how Hajun had given her that water in the helicopter when she felt sick. He had told her to look up or look at him to distract her from her fear of heights. She had even thought to herself then, why did he have to be so handsome? Just his gaze made her feel breathless. She had a desperate urge to run her fingers through his hair whenever the wind blew it. She convinced herself it was just a natural reaction to an attractive man. But she had never felt anything like this towards him at the company. And then it hit her. It was all because he had given her CPR and stolen her first kiss. She firmly decided that she had to avoid all physical contact with him. Haejun looked at her in surprise when she returned. She was wearing different clothes! Yeonhee happily announced that she had found her bag. She explained she'd brought a change of clothes for rock climbing, and they had survived. His precious tumbler was also safe. Hajun asked about her phone. The phone was in the bag, but the battery was dead. She also told him she'd found the helicopter, and although it was wrecked, there were useful things inside. Hajun listened, thinking that since the helicopter had crashed into the water, the communication equipment was surely beyond repair. Yeonhee optimistically listed their findings and suggested they search for more in the morning. She smiled, happy that their situation seemed to be improving. Hajun looked at her with unconcealed admiration. He said she was incredible, and he couldn't believe she could smile like that in their predicament. Yeonhee thought that she had never seen him smile happily himself. He had grown up with everything, but maybe that was why he never felt truly happy. Hajun, having put his shoes back on, reminded her that he had gathered a lot of wood and asked when she was going to make the fire. Yeonhee pulled a lighter from her pocket and flicked it on. Hajun was furious. So that was her skill, starting a fire with a lighter? She just calmly replied that it worked. He asked where she got a lighter since she didn't smoke. She explained that when the kidnappers grabbed her, she got scared and grabbed the first thing she could on the Jeep's floor. She had planned to burn through the ropes if they tied her up. Hajun was stunned by her foresight and by the fact that she had seriously thought he'd sent people to kidnap her. Yeonhee proudly declared that people who have gone through hardships are always prepared for danger. She recalled how their house would flood during rainy season and how a typhoon had once blown their roof off. Thanks to her preparedness, they now had a wonderful fire. She asked for his thoughts on seeing the leader personally make fire. Hajun sarcastically asked if he should give her a round of applause. Yeonhee sat by the fire and said that people become leaders to earn respect, and that he sometimes acted that way too. She reminded him of when he went viral on the internet. The arrogant way he treated the journalists made him look like a big shot. Realizing she might have gone too far, she tried to change the subject. But suddenly, the man said something about her lipstick. She didn't understand what he meant, and Hajun simply said that the color of her lipstick was pretty and suited her well. Yeonhee blushed beet red with embarrassment. She started making excuses, saying she just found the lipstick in her bag and her lips were dry. Hajun calmly replied that her natural lip color was already pretty, but this one was nice too because it had glitter. Her heart fluttered again at his unexpected compliment. To hide her awkwardness, she asked when they were going to go fishing. Suddenly, she remembered she had food. She pulled out containers with leftover in-flight meals. Hajun recognized the buns, yogurt, and fruit. Yeonhee proudly added that she had also grabbed 2 sugar packets, as well as forks, knives, and napkins. Hajun looked at her with a slight smile. He joked that she should have brought the whole plane with her. Yeonhee, slicing a bun, said that people who have known hunger don't waste food. She was about to add that he, having grown up in luxury, wouldn't understand, but his stomach rumbled loudly. She smiled and offered to share her food with him as comrades in misfortune. But Hajun, not waiting for an invitation, took his half of the bun, declaring that she wouldn't get to eat it all herself. She asked if it was tasty. He replied that the bread was stale and dry, but for some reason, it tasted better than any gourmet dish. Yeonhee watched him and smiled. They sat by the fire, silently finishing their modest dinner. Suddenly, Yeonhee excitedly called for him to look at the sunset. She said she had never seen anything so beautiful. Hajun agreed that it was a first for him, too. He added thoughtfully that the sunset looks that way because of the dust in the atmosphere. Yeonhee mentally chuckled. It was so like him to talk about dust while looking at such beauty. He explained that without dust, we wouldn't be able to see the sunset. And then he drew a parallel, asking if their lives weren't like that dust. Yeonhee picked up on his thought. She said that even though this moment felt useless and annoying, someday, looking back, it would seem beautiful to them. Hajun listened to her in silence, his expression softening. She noticed he was staring at her and shyly told him to look at the sunset. But he answered quietly that her eyes were now filled with the sunset, and that made them dazzling. Yeonhee's heart skipped another beat. He continued, calling her an amazing person, positive, brave, and able to inspire people. Yeonhee shyly brushed it off, saying he was flattering her. He reached out and gently touched her cheek. She flinched, but he admitted he didn't know what he was doing either. He just didn't like it when she lowered her head. He pulled his hand away and said there was something he had to tell her. Hajun apologized for them getting stranded, saying it was his fault. If he hadn't been so arrogant, this wouldn't have happened. He said he was reflecting on his actions and asked for her forgiveness. Yeonhee stared at him, amazed. Could a person really change so much in such a short time?
The Kang Ha-jun she was seeing now was nothing like the one who always walked past her at the company.
She smiled and said she forgave him. He asked with relief if she really meant it. She replied that it was all because of the sunset, and thanks to him, she was seeing the most beautiful sunset of her life. They sat side by side, silently watching the sun dip below the horizon. Later, as they settled down to sleep by the dying fire, Hae-jun asked if she was asleep. He reminded her of his promise to compensate her for all her troubles and told her to make any wish when they returned to Korea. Yeonhee thought about it. Her wish. No one had ever asked her that before. She said quietly that her wish was a house where her brother, Yeonhee, could live comfortably. Because of his wheelchair, they always had to live on the ground floor, on a busy street. Their apartment was dark and damp, full of dust and mold. Such an environment was bad for her brother, whose lungs had been weakened after the accident. She dreamed of a house filled with sunlight, where her brother could breathe fresh air whenever he wanted. She was tired of constantly moving and dealing with rental issues. She just wanted a home of their own. Hae-jun was about to say he could make it happen, but she cut him off, saying she wasn't asking him to buy her a house. She just wanted to say her wish out loud for the first time. But Ha-jun said firmly that he would buy her that house, because it was her wish and because he had promised to reward her. But first, he added, they had to survive and get out of here. And then, he asked her not to leave him behind. She was surprised. Why would he even think she would leave him? He replied that he knew he was a burden to her because he didn't know how to do anything. He asked her to be honest and admit that she had wanted to leave him behind. Yeonhee confessed that the thought had crossed her mind for a fleeting moment, but she would have never actually done it. She looked at him, sleeping on the dirty ground, and thought how humiliating it must be for such a proud man. She promised that she would never leave him, because a leader can't be a leader alone. Hae-jun, who had been pretending to be asleep, heard her words, and a warm smile touched his lips. Since they couldn't sleep, Yeonhee suggested playing a word chain game, with the loser getting a flick on the forehead. The game went on, until it was Yeonhee's turn to find a word starting with E. She was stumped, and Ha-jun prepared to deliver the flick. In a panic, she shouted, "Emoji!" But Ha-jun argued that the correct word was emoticon. She started arguing that her version was also correct, but he was adamant. She didn't calculate her strength and gave him such a hard flick that it looked like smoke was coming from his head. She apologized in horror, but he, rubbing his red forehead, did not accept her apology. With a vengeful smile, he announced it was his turn now. Yeonhee panicked. She had to find a word starting with K, and she knew that if she lost, his flick could be lethal. She couldn't think of anything, and Ha-jun already had his hand ready to strike. In desperation, she yelled out, "Kiss!" The word hung in the air, and the game came to an abrupt halt. His hand froze an inch from her forehead, and they just stared at each other, the tension between them becoming almost palpable. An awkward but warm silence hung in the air. They just looked at each other, and the tension of the moment slowly melted away. Hae-jun awkwardly suggested they go to sleep, and as if on command, they both turned away, breaking the moment. But sleeping on the hard ground was torture for his pampered body. His back immediately started aching in pain. He was terribly uncomfortable, but looking at Yeonhee, he saw she was sleeping peacefully, like a child. While she slept, dark thoughts flooded his mind. Someone had truly tried to kill him. The first suspect was his brother, Sung-jun. He recalled how his brother might have decided to kill him after Ha-jun found a new mine right after the bauxite imports were stopped. They were once very close. Even though they had different mothers, they always supported each other while studying abroad. But everything changed when Ha-jun's company began to grow, driving a wedge between them. Their father only added fuel to the fire, constantly humiliating Sung-jun and holding Ha-jun up as an example. He threw documents in his face, asking what he had achieved while Ha-jun built his empire alone. Hae-jun knew his father wasn't doing it out of love for him, but to stoke Sung-jun's inferiority complex. But in doing so, he had unwillingly become an enemy to his own brother. And yet, Ha-jun had his doubts. Even if his brother wanted him dead, he lacked the courage and meticulousness to orchestrate something like this. If not his brother, then who? Maybe that woman, Shim Jung-ah, his father's former secretary and now his stepmother. She had worked for him for over 30 years, patiently waiting for her moment, even hiding the fact that she had borne him a son. By getting rid of Ha-jun, it would be easier for her to dispose of Sung-jun too, clearing the path to the inheritance for her own son, Hyuk-jun. She was patient and ambitious enough for that. But would she take such a risk? If his father found out the truth, she would lose everything. There was one other option: his own father. The shareholders were increasingly supporting Ha-jun, and his father could see him as a threat to his position. But would he really go as far as to kill his own son? Ha-jun couldn't believe his father hated him that much. He grabbed his head, unable to believe he was suspecting his entire family. At that moment, a quiet groan interrupted his thoughts. He looked at Yeonhee and thought how horrible it would have been to be stranded here all alone. Even if someone wanted him dead, he had Ms. Mo by his side, helping him survive. She had promised not to leave him behind. Her groan came again. Ha-jun grew alarmed. Could she be sick? Her face contorted in pain. She wasn't here. She was trapped in a nightmare. In her dream, the day that changed everything came to life. A young Yeonhee begged her mom to let her sit by the window. Her parents tried to dissuade her, since she had sat there last time. But the girl threw a tantrum, refusing to give the seat to her younger brother, Yeonwoo. In the end, her father gave in. He placed his happy daughter in the coveted seat. Her mom sighed that they were spoiling her, but her dad just asked his daughter to let her brother have the seat next time. The girl pressed her face to the window in delight. She proudly asked her father, an aircraft mechanic, if he fixed big planes like these. To her, he was the best in the world. But soon the plane began its descent, and she drifted off to sleep. Her mother gently woke her when they had almost arrived. She smiled, and in that instant, a deafening roar erupted. An explosion tore the plane apart. Impact. A scream. Flames raged around them, and through the fire, she could hear cries for help. Yeonhee called for her mom, then her dad, but there was no answer. She saw her younger brother, Yeonwoo. He was crying, complaining that his legs hurt. She stared at him in horror, not understanding what had happened. But one thought was forever seared into her memory. She survived because she sat by the window. If she hadn't been so stubborn, if she had given the seat to her brother. Ha-jun shook her, pulling her from the nightmare. He touched her forehead. She was burning up. All her bravery had been just a mask. Suddenly, Yeonhee clung to him, sobbing and crying out her brother's name. Yeonwoo! Her body trembled in his arms. He felt her pain so acutely, it was as if a knife had been plunged into his own heart. He held her tighter, gently patting her back, trying to soothe her. She was crying even in her sleep. She finally calmed down and stopped shaking, but continued to sleep in his arms. He sighed in relief, but then froze. In her sleep, Yeonhee began to move, pressing herself even closer to him. Ha-jun couldn't believe what was happening. In such a critical situation, his body was responding to his secretary. His heart began to pound wildly. Could it be he had feelings for Ms. Mo? This was driving him crazy. This was no time for such thoughts. If she woke up now, she would misunderstand everything. He began to shake her gently. He desperately pleaded for her to wake up. Finally, she opened her eyes, and he breathed a sigh of relief. He noticed her cheeks were wet and asked if she had been crying. But Yeonhee denied it, still confused about what was happening. Realizing she was sitting on his lap, Yeonhee screamed and pushed him away. She frantically asked what he had been doing while she slept. Ha-jun calmly replied that he hadn't done anything. She was the one who had lunged at him. He told her she was having a nightmare, sweating and talking in her sleep, and asked who Yeonwoo was. Yeonhee, calming down a bit, answered that it was her younger brother, and it was for his sake that she had to survive and return home. Ha-jun envied their close relationship. But Yeonhee just scoffed, saying he was the one to be envied, the son of a chairman and the brother of a CEO. His expression darkened. He suggested she come closer to the fire and warm up after her cold sweat. But the fire was starting to die down. Yeonhee guessed it was because of the humidity. They couldn't let it go out. Ha-jun decided to try and save the flame. He desperately blew on the smoldering embers, trying to reignite them. He pleaded with the fire to keep burning. And he succeeded. The flame flared up with renewed strength, and Ha-jun looked proudly at Yeonhee. She clapped for him, surprised at how quickly he was adapting. Ha-jun smugly promised to surprise her even more. He was determined to prove she was wrong for calling him useless. But just then, the first drops of rain fell from the sky. Soon, a downpour drenched them, and they took shelter under the helicopter wreckage. Ha-jun took off his soaked shirt. He explained that he had tried his best, but didn't expect it to rain. He offered her his wrung-out shirt, but Yeonhee couldn't take her eyes off his body. She thought it was no wonder he had such a physique. He always took great care of himself. Yeonhee said she was fine and suggested he put the shirt on so he wouldn't get cold. But he refused, saying a wet shirt would only make him colder. And immediately, a shiver ran through him from the cold. He couldn't understand why it was so cold in the tropics. They both sat, hugging their shoulders. Yeonhee thought, ironically, that his spectacular body was of no use in this situation. Ha-jun panicked that they might freeze to death. Yeonhee figured he just wasn't used to the cold, having always lived in warmth. For her, this temperature was nothing. She estimated it was about 18 degrees Celsius, 64 degrees Fahrenheit, and curled up to keep from catching a cold. Ha-jun didn't want to show his weakness, but he couldn't take it anymore. He covered his face with his hands, apologizing for his uselessness. Yeonhee asked in shock if he was crying. She moved closer and offered him a shoulder to cry on, promising not to tell anyone. But Ha-jun, embarrassed, claimed his tears wouldn't come out because it was too cold. After a moment's thought, Yeonhee decided on a drastic measure. She asked him not to get her wrong. She said she was doing it only for survival and asked him to just not think about it. And with that, she hugged him from behind to warm him with her body. Ha-jun was shocked, but Yeonhee calmly told him to sleep, as it would be warmer when the sun rose. She explained that this was the best she could do as the leader and asked him to think of her as a heater. But Ha-jun stopped her, saying this wasn't right. Yeonhee asked if he was uncomfortable. He lifted her up and sat her on his lap, facing him, before hugging her tightly. He explained that he liked to do things properly. Yeonhee panicked at such an intimate position. But Ha-jun insisted they needed to sit like this to keep warm. Her heart pounded in her chest. He intertwined their fingers. He reminded her that they had agreed to forget everything. Their genders, their status as boss and secretary, their age difference. He smiled and promised it would get warmer soon. Yeonhee's heart was racing, but at the same time, she felt a sense of calm wash over her. She didn't understand how he could have gotten so warm so quickly, but his warmth was melting away all her negative feelings. She mentally ordered herself to get a grip. The next day, she tried to convince herself that her attraction to Ha-jun was a natural reaction, since he was handsome and had become more caring. But then she reminded herself that in the jungle, he was still completely useless. Just then, Ha-jun himself appeared holding 2 coconuts. He explained that he found them under the palm trees after the storm. Yeonhee immediately took back her words about him being useless. They enjoyed the coconut flesh, but their city habits were showing. Yeonhee was craving an Americano, and then their fantasies ran wild. Tteokbokki, steak with truffle oil, dumplings, chicken. Ha-jun even suggested they look for bird eggs because he was dying for some fried eggs. Yeonhee smiled, declared she was quitting as his secretary again, and as the leader, she was ordering him to gather more coconuts. Ha-jun immediately jumped to his feet, ready to obey his leader's command. But he quickly added that he wouldn't accept her resignation and would promote her to assistant manager when they got back to Seoul. Yeonhee's eyes lit up with joy. He promised her a big bonus and to count this time as office hours. All he asked in return was for her to keep smiling like that and stay by his side. Yeonhee understood he meant stay with him in the jungle, and she happily agreed. Ha-jun went off to get coconuts, while Yeonhee decided to catch some fish. In the end, Ha-jun tended the fire, while Yeonhee returned with a bountiful catch. She had caught not only fish, but also various shellfish. Ha-jun was shocked that she had actually managed to catch all of this. He admiringly called her a competent employee and decided to promote her straight to manager. Yeonhee playfully accepted. The day grew hotter and hazier. Yeonhee was suffering from the heat. Ha-jun noticed and suggested they take a break. She was surprised by his perceptiveness, but he immediately added that he was just worried she might collapse. It turned out he was the one who was tired. They sat down in the shade. Ha-jun complained about the heat, but Yeonhee replied that it was still better than sleeping in a house without windows in the summer. He didn't get the joke and suggested just turning on the AC, earning him a death glare. She then decided to recite a poem written by a child from a rich family.
It described how all the servants in the house were poor, and the child wondered when their family would become rich. Yeonhee concluded with a smile that since her secretary was poor, he couldn't be that rich either. Hajun dryly replied that it wasn't funny. Yeonhee retorted that his joke about the air conditioner wasn't funny either. Hajun sighed heavily, wiping away sweat. Yeonhee noticed how much he was struggling. He hadn't even slept well the previous night. She decided to find something nutritious for him and prepared to go look for fruit alone so they wouldn't get lost again. To keep him from following her, she asked him to stay and sing her a song. Hajun flatly refused, claiming he couldn't remember the last time he sang, and had even skipped his preschool talent show to avoid embarrassment. But Yeonhee threatened to go to Jakarta by herself, and he had to agree immediately. As she was leaving, she took out a small axe. When he asked why, she said it was for protection against wild animals. Hajun jumped up in a panic, unable to believe there were wild animals there. He declared that she couldn't handle them alone and decided to go with her. But then he imagined how many bugs would be swarming around the sweet fruit, and he flinched. Yeonhee started listing them off. Ants, spiders, centipedes, scorpions. Hajun immediately changed his mind and, keeping his distance, wished her a safe trip. But Yeonhee decided to tease him and shouted that she saw a bug. Hajun leaped up in terror. He started frantically shaking himself off, stomping and waving his arms. He realized she was teasing him, but Yeonhee, laughing, pointed to his shoulder. A large, leaf-like bug was sitting there. She told him to stay still and slowly reached for the insect. Hajun stopped her, worried the bug might be poisonous. He offered to remove it with his own hand. He admitted the mere thought of touching it gave him the shivers, but he would hate himself even more if she got hurt. Yeonhee assured him the bug wasn't poisonous, and even if it was, her job as a secretary was to protect him. But Hajun insisted it was his fault they were here, and he had to take responsibility. She started to remind him that she'd already forgiven him, but just then, the bug on his shoulder twitched. Yeonhee feared that if the bug was poisonous, Hajun would be in danger. Without a second thought, she pressed herself against him and blew hard on the bug, sending it flying off her boss's shoulder. She happily announced that the bug was gone. Hajun looked at her with an unreadable expression. He stopped her before she could say anything. He gently touched her cheek and said she shouldn't have done that, and slowly leaned in to kiss her. Her heart hammered as she closed her eyes in anticipation. But instead of a kiss, he simply blew something out of her hair. It turned out the bug from his shoulder had flown onto her. He asked with a smirk why she had closed her eyes. Was she scared of the bug? Yeonhee exploded with embarrassment and fury, shouting that he would have been scared too if he were in her shoes. She stormed off in anger. Hajun was baffled as to why she was mad, since he had chased away the scary bug. He realized she was genuinely upset. She demanded that he sing as promised, loudly. He sighed, reminding her that leaders don't just give orders. But he complied. Yeonhee listened to him sing and wondered why he had been so reluctant since he had a good voice. The choice of song, however, was odd. She couldn't believe he was singing a sad love ballad on such a hot day. She had always thought of him as a workaholic with no interest in dating. But could it be that he also had someone he loved? Lost in thought, she walked on, realizing that at his age, he must have been in relationships. She knew he wasn't heartless and wondered how gentle he must have been with someone he loved. The thought sent a pang through her heart. She was startled. What was that pain? Was it an after effect of the crash? She decided she would definitely get a checkup when she got home and file for workers' compensation. When she returned, Hajun was shocked by the abundance of fruit she had brought back. There was a pineapple, papaya, and mango. But the biggest surprise was coffee beans. Hajun was touched beyond words. She proudly declared that even here, she was still his secretary and was obligated to serve him coffee. And for the cherry on top, she handed him his beloved tumbler. But his expression was strange. An idea suddenly dawned on Yeonhee. She solemnly promised that his lips were sealed and swore to take the secret of his attachment to the tumbler to her grave. Hajun stared blankly at her bizarre performance. He finally cut her off, saying he didn't need the tumbler for coffee. It was an electronic tool that measured bauxite purity on the spot. Yeonhee froze. Bauxite? The mineral that the company was having import issues with? So it wasn't just a tumbler. She asked why he had told her to bring it. He replied that he had received information about a mine in Sumatra. So that's where he was flying to on the helicopter.
He hadn't told anyone to keep the location a secret. It all made sense now. The tumbler was the key to saving the company, but why did he entrust such an important item to her? She recalled that they had never spoken before, yet he knew her name and phone number. Could it be that he had noticed how good she was at her job? She asked hopefully if he had given her this task because he thought highly of her skills. She had always believed that someone would one day acknowledge her hard work, but she never thought that person would be Mr. Kang. She praised him, saying he was not only a genius developer, but also a good judge of character. And she promised to work even harder once they were back in Seoul. Haejun clenched his fist, feeling a wave of guilt. He decided he had to tell her the truth. He explained that he couldn't let anyone know about his trip to the mine. So he decided to entrust the important task to her, because the other employees simply didn't notice her and wouldn't pay her any mind. He apologized. Yeonhee coldly replied that he didn't need to apologize for the fact that she was an outcast. She understood his logic perfectly. If he needed an unnoticeable employee, she was the perfect fit. No one would believe she could be entrusted with something important. He had made a rational decision for the company's sake. But for some reason, her whole body ached, and it became hard to breathe. She asked why he hadn't just sent her back then, but took her in the helicopter. He replied that he wanted to show her the mine, so she'd understand the task's importance, afraid she would just hand over the tumbler and leave. He was afraid she would think of herself as unimportant. He wanted to help improve her self-esteem, but things had turned out this way. Yeonhee snapped, asking why he even thought she had low self-esteem. She thought he was different. She believed the ones at fault were those who ignored her because of her background, not her. She didn't need anyone to boost her self-esteem. Haejun was at a loss for words. She told him that if he thought she was losing her self-respect by doing menial tasks, he was greatly mistaken. Secretaries exist to make their bosses shine. They work in the shadows. She asked how he intended to boost her self-esteem when she had diligently performed her duties for 2 years, even restocking the toilet paper in his private restroom, and never once found it demeaning. Haejun was stunned. Yeonhee bowed. She stated that a cleaner doesn't have low self-esteem because of their job, and that judging people based on their background is something only scumbags would do. She thought he wasn't that kind of person. She was disappointed. With those words, she turned and walked away. Haejun was left alone with all their belongings. She turned back and ordered him to bring every single thing with him. He asked her to walk slowly, but she just told him to hurry up. He breathed a sigh of relief, realizing that at least she wasn't leaving him behind. But how could he make amends? What was the best way to calm down an angry woman? He regretted working all the time instead of dating and ran after her. That evening, she announced they were sleeping here and told him to start a fire while she gathered banana leaves. He meekly offered to sing for her to make up for it, but she coldly refused. All he could do was tell her to be careful. He realized she was really angry. He wanted to talk and make up before bed, but he saw that she had made her bed very far away from him. The distance between them was vast. She started making coffee. He suggested she rest, but she insisted she wanted to drink it. He offered to help, but she cut him off, saying there was nothing he could do. He thought sadly that she didn't even want to talk to him. He thought their shared experience would bring them closer, but instead, a wall of awkwardness had grown between them. He knew it was his fault and tried to reconnect, asking if the baked cassava was good. She coldly told him to try it himself. He took a bite, not even knowing what it tasted like. He felt like he was going to get indigestion from the stress. Yeonhee then announced she was tired and going to bed. He was surprised it was so early. He asked if they were going to play the word chain game, but she just snapped that she was tired. He didn't give up and suggested she sleep in his spot, saying it was warmer there. She just gave him a death glare. She couldn't believe he had tried to help her self-esteem out of pity for her, a poor scholarship student and a shadow in the office. She understood he felt guilty, but as the object of his pity, she found the situation ridiculous and draining. She told him to stop apologizing and evaluating her by his standards. She was just doing her best to live, and he didn't know everything about her. He realized he had hurt her. In the middle of the night, she woke up and didn't see him nearby. He wasn't at the camp! She started calling his name in a panic, but the only response was silence and the eerie sounds of the jungle. She grabbed a torch, determined to find him. Doubts plagued her. What if they missed each other? What if she got lost?
What would happen to the helpless Haejun all alone?
Casting aside her fear, she screamed his name with all her might. She yelled again and again, worried because he knew nothing about surviving in the jungle. She wondered if he had left because she was mad, or if he was trying to scare her as payback. But she immediately dismissed the thought. He wasn't the type to stoop so low. She regretted not being able to control her anger and explain why she was upset. She was simply embarrassed that he, her boss, knew how she was ignored at the office. And it hurt that he, of all people, pitied her. She had pretended to be strong because she was afraid of looking pathetic in his eyes. She screamed his name again. Realizing that shouting was useless, she decided to search for him, leaving marks with her knife along the way. Her face was a mask of determination and fear. She ran out onto the beach and saw him. He was walking along the shore, carrying his belongings. Oh my God, you guys. I am literally shaking after this part. Like, can we talk about Yeonhee for a second? Girl is a literal survival queen. She's out here ripping her skirt, catching fish with her bare hands, and basically carrying the entire company on her back while her genius CEO boss is over there getting terrified by a spider web. I mean, Hajun is gorgeous, don't get me wrong. Those muscles are muscling. But he was a total cyborg back at the office. But then, the crash happened, and suddenly, the vibes shifted so fast. Between that accidental first kiss CPR moment and the way they had to huddle together for warmth, calling herself a human heater, I was screaming! My heart was doing backflips! But then he had to go and say he only picked her because she was invisible to everyone else. My heart literally broke for her. You could feel her pride just shatter. And just when they're finally starting to see each other as actual human beings, he goes missing in the middle of the night. I was panicking right along with her, but seeing him walk along that shore at the end, I have so many questions. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you're as obsessed with this slow burn romance as I am, make sure to smash that like button and subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter of this jungle chaos. But wait, I need to know your thoughts. Would you forgive Hajun for calling Yeonhee invisible just because she's a hard worker? Or is he still a total jerk in your eyes? Let's talk about it in the comments below. I'll be reading all of them. See you in the next one!